Hello everyone and welcome once again to ThursDev. I'm your host Luke, and today we'll be continuing our look at game balancing with a more technology and community-based approach to identifying balancing issues and addressing them commonly employed in multiplayer games. Today we're going to talk about chasing the meta. During the development process, game balance deals very heavily on theory, mathematical models, and subjective experience. Typically, a designer or design team will define stats, abilities, and other player-controlled mechanics from a number of assumptions and wisdom gained from play experience and past encounters with similar games. By modeling standard assumed player behavior, a designer can usually, with a reasonable amount of accuracy, define some in-game values that will be mathematically sound, if not perhaps sometimes a little too wishful in implementation. After player, resource, combat balance, and playtime modeling are finished on paper and implemented in a first pass, usually gameplay goes through a period of internal and focused playtesting, and based on subjective feedback as well as metrics gathered from the application during play that report player behavior and interactions that can easily be returned to a mathematical model, it goes through a number of balancing iterations. With any luck, feedback gained during playtesting leads to many of the most important balance issues being addressed, and by the time a game is ready to go gold, it's at least a strong, and hopefully at least reasonably balanced play experience. Unfortunately, once a game's been released into the wild, as I mentioned during my video about QA, there are so many erratic and unforeseen player behaviors that manifest during gameplay that even the most well-researched balance process is found to be rarely even close to a spotless game. At times, certain characters will have playstyles that are completely at odds with what they were designed for, while some characters will be found to be better at certain roles than others specifically designed for those roles. In many cases, it'll also be found that aside from the core testing team, who have a classic development tunnel vision and perfect and nuanced execution of a character's abilities, one or more characters will be considered too difficult to use effectively, or just subjectively annoying to play with or against. This sort of play experience, coupled with other player analysis, tactics, and other exposed data, is collectively known as a game's meta. When you hear people discussing the meta of a multiplayer game, they're most frequently referring to the analysis of the game done either by the number-crunching superfans of the game's community, or simply by observing the highest level play, which details the best or at least most successful strategies to win the game within the constraints of the game's current balance. The more active the player base is in a multiplayer game with an active analysis of meta, the more likely it is to highlight some very large balance issues that may either have slipped the attention of the design team completely, or simply weren't an issue in theory, but proved to be inviable for an average player. Regardless of the reasoning for this perceived imbalance, a studio that's dedicated to delivering a quality product will monitor this information by regular looks at the game's forums, fan sites, and also by looking at data gathered through analytics tools and rebalance accordingly. Though subjective information from players is valuable in gauging the overall perception of a character's usefulness and most viable strategies to employ during a multiplayer competitive game, there is little in our toolkit that's more valuable than metrics data gathered through monitoring play. As most players are already aware, every action in a multiplayer game that uses a server-client structure sends data through a server which is then distributed to all other connected clients in order to create a synchronized gameplay experience. This is done in a matter of milliseconds in each case, but every move, click, or ability execution is sent and at that point logged on the server. This information is gathered, organized into databases, and provided to the developer either through in-house tools or through analytics tools like Flurry or Delta DNA. The data that's presented can then be organized into reports with simple SQL queries and employed in the pursuit of better balancing. Different information is used in different ways: how often a character dies in a certain situation, how often a character is picked, and a myriad of other metrics can be checked and fed back into the mathematical models that were created and used for more and more accurate data. If a level is found to be particularly one-sided to a certain team, designers can also refer to data showing how much time is spent in specific areas of maps, how many shots are fired in those locations, and how often characters are killed there in the case of an FPS. This sort of data is often returned to the designer in the form of what's known as a heat map. Heat maps show the concentration of specific actions or action sets on a map and can be instrumental in determining points of map design failure that should be addressed, be it to create additional points of ingress into a particularly egregious bottlenecked kill zone, or to remove one that's needlessly difficult to defend. Raising heights or clearing obstacles, even minor wall shifts or the way that a door behaves are among the tweaks that are born from this kind of data. If a character is found to be particularly underused, one of their abilities is ineffectual, or if they have a particularly high failure rate in certain situations, they can be tweaked to become more viable. This concept of using live and constantly fluctuating player data is known as analytics-driven balancing, but I like to, when also pairing it with more broad focus on also listening to the voice of the player, call it chasing the meta. Designers follow the player-created, widely accepted meta and find what's considered to be good or bad, make value judgments on the merits of altering, and execute in a game patch. The most successful studios are making this a constant process, with places like Overwatch's Blizzard Entertainment having a scheduled gameplay balance rollout every Tuesday on all of their multiplayer games, as well as larger balance changes being tested on their publicly available PTR, or Public Test Realm. As a stellar example of following the meta to great effect, I turn to Blizzard's recent extreme redesign of their Symmetric character based on player usage in an attempt to make her more viable in more situations. Their analysis of the game's meta showed conclusively that her usage was very situational, only to be used in defensive situations, and even then on only the very first point of any given map. Entire moves were scrapped and rejiggered, and the character's usage rates have been upped dramatically since that redesign. Mobile studios also employ this sort of analytics tracking as well. How many players have gained access to objects of certain rarity, playstyle preferences, and more. This data can be used to inform future live operations decisions and is also instrumental in ensuring that any exploits or issues are identified and addressed at all times. Long gone are the days of a game being finished when it's released. It's hubris to claim that a product can't be improved by watching how it's being played and making alterations to improve its balance and play experience. Though consumers will complain about day one patches or overly frequent patching, games in their prime are living, breathing entities that can always benefit from a little improvement, and as designers, if we're actively chasing the meta, following the perceptions of our players, and analyzing our analytics, we'll become not only better studios for the games that we've already released, but also more adept designers into the future. Thank you as always for watching this episode of ThursDev, and that wraps it up for 2016. I hope that you've enjoyed our content this year, and I sincerely hope that we can continue to deliver content that you'll want to watch in 2017 and hopefully beyond. For now though, happy holidays, see you next year, and of course,